Annabelle, darling, this table is reserved for family. Why don't you take a seat at the bar instead? My mother delivered the line with a sweet smile right in front of 30 guests at my grandmother's 80th birthday celebration. Laughter rippled through the room. Several people nodded as if it made perfect sense. Moments later, the waiter set a $3,270 bill directly in front of me, solely me, covering all 30 of them. I sipped my water, offered a calm smile, and paid the full amount. But before I could rise, a clear voice sliced through the chatter from the head of the table. "One moment, please." What unfolded next stripped my mother of everything she'd quietly drained over the previous 24 years. Before I continue, if this story truly resonates with you, please like and subscribe, and in the comments, share your city and current local time. I truly enjoy seeing where everyone's joining from. My name is Annabelle. I'm 29. This is the story of how I finally refused to let my family treat me like an outsider in my own existence. Let me bring you back to Crestwood, Georgia, to the evening when everything shifted. I was 5 when I entered the Everett home. My true parents, James and Lucy, perished on a Tuesday. A pickup truck barreled through a red light on Route 9 and struck them head-on. I was at daycare, happily painting a crooked sunflower. By the time someone reached me, I was an orphan. Richard Everett, my father's elder brother, insisted on taking custody. His wife Diane did not share that insistence. I figured that out quickly. Kyle and Madison, their biological children, enjoyed upstairs bedrooms with coordinated bedding, glow-in-the-dark ceiling stars, and animal-shaped nightlights. My space was in the basement, beside the washing machine, a tiny window no bigger than a shoebox. Some nights the dryer rumbled awake at 2 a.m., thumping like an extra heartbeat while I lay listening. Diane never struck me. She was far too clever for that. Her cruelty thrived in subtle exclusions, invisible to anyone not on the receiving end. 3 plates set for dinner instead of 4. "Oh, Annabelle, I forgot again. Go grab one, would you?" Family photographs lined the mantel, the staircase, the annual Christmas cards, Kyle beaming, Madison in pigtails, Richard's arm around Diane. I appeared in none. At 8, I asked why. Diane gazed at me as though I'd questioned the color of the sky. "Those are family portraits, Annabelle," she replied softly. That gentle tone hurt the most. Neighbors viewed her as saintly, the generous woman who took in her husband's orphaned niece and sacrificed so much. I heard the praise at church, the market, school pickup. What I didn't discover, what remained hidden for another 24 years, was that my parents hadn't left me empty-handed. They'd secured $600,000 for me. Diane had spent every dollar. By 16, the pattern was clear. Kyle received a used Camaro for his birthday. Madison got braces, a violin, and summer camp in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I earned an employee discount at Hank's Grocery on Route 12, stocking shelves 3 evenings a week to cover my own school supplies. The year Kyle headed to college, I asked Richard if anything had been set aside for me. In the garage, he fiddled with wrenches, avoiding my eyes. "I'll speak with Diane," he muttered. Her response arrived at dinner. "College isn't for everyone, Annabelle. You're skilled with your hands." Kyle's tuition totaled $80,000. I saw the check in Diane's handwriting on the counter and realized it was more money than I could fathom. I stayed silent. I applied independently to the local community college nursing program, took federal loans, and worked double summer shifts at Hank's. Holidays always centered on the photographs. Each Thanksgiving and Christmas, Diane orchestrated the ideal family portrait before the fireplace. She'd pass me the camera. "You're the finest photographer here, Annabelle." So I composed the shots. Kyle in his college sweatshirt, Madison showing off new earrings, Richard rigid in flannel, Diane glowing at the center. I'd click the shutter, the flash would flare, and the image captured exactly the flawless family Diane wished the world to see. I was absent from every frame. Yet one person in that household never overlooked me, never needed reminding to include me. Eleanor Everett, Richard's mother, was 80, barely 5'2", and the sole family member who made me feel entitled to exist. A retired schoolteacher, her quiet kitchen perennially carried the scent of cinnamon, and her quiet voice could hush a room effortlessly. Every Sunday, she collected me at 9 sharp. We'd head to her Maple Hill cottage, where she'd teach me apple crumble, buttermilk biscuits, and peach cobbler from scratch. As the oven warmed, she'd share memories of my father. "James had your eyes," she'd say, flour dusting her hands while rolling dough. "And your mother, Lucy, smiled like sunlight breaking through clouds. You carry that same light, Annabelle." I'd treasure those words like precious coins, fingering them through lonely basement nights. Diane resented those Sundays. "She's 80, Annabelle. You're exhausting her. She's delicate. Don't burden her with your issues. Perhaps skip this week. She needs peace." I went regardless, until the year Diane warned that if I caused more trouble, she'd convince Eleanor I no longer wished to visit. At 14, I believed her. After that, I sought permission first, and it wasn't always given. One Sunday, near my 17th birthday, Eleanor set down her rolling pin and met my gaze with eyes both keen and sorrowful. "Your parents loved you deeply enough to prepare for your future, Annabelle. Never forget it." I nodded as if I understood. I didn't for 12 more years, but Eleanor knew precisely what she meant, and she had already begun arranging her own quiet plans. Now, at 29, I'm a registered nurse at Crestwood Community Hospital, living independently in a modest one-bedroom above the Cherry Street laundromat. It's compact, noisy on laundry days, but entirely mine. Eleanor's health has declined lately, knees painful, breath short on stairs, yet her mind remains razor-sharp. I still drive to Maple Hill every Sunday. The family knows what Eleanor possesses: the cottage, her late husband's pension, savings accumulated over 5 decades, easily exceeding $1 million. In Crestwood, that's real wealth. Diane launched her subtle campaign in January. She'd arrive at Eleanor's with shop-bought flowers and casually note how distant and difficult I'd become lately, hinting I only visited for the inheritance. Kyle reinforced it at Easter brunch. "Grandma, you know Annabelle isn't technically family, legally speaking." Madison shared Instagram stories, selfies with Eleanor captioned "Blood is thicker than water" with a heart emoji, tagging everyone but me. Then came the call, a Thursday evening in late March. Richard's name lit my screen. He hadn't phoned in 4 months. "Annabelle," he began, voice practiced and weary, "about Mom's birthday dinner this Saturday." "Maybe it's better if you skip it, for everyone's sake." I pulled the phone from my ear, stared at the ceiling. "Whose sake, Richard?" A long pause. "It'll only stir up tension. You know how Diane can be." I did know. That was the entire problem. I said I'd consider it, then ended the call. I had no idea the conversation was merely one piece of a larger scheme already weeks in motion. The next morning, I dialed Eleanor. She answered on the first ring, as though she'd been waiting by the phone. "Grandma, Richard suggested I shouldn't come Saturday." Silence stretched. Then, "Did he explain why?" "He said it would cause tension." Her breathing remained even, deliberate. When she spoke again, her tone carried an unfamiliar urgency. "You must come, Annabelle, no matter what anyone says. Promise me." "I promise. And wear something nice, something that makes you feel powerful." I nearly laughed. "Grandma, it's just dinner." "Promise me." "I promise." The faint creak of her rocking chair came through the line. "I love you, sweetheart, more than you can imagine." She disconnected before I could ask why her voice trembled. That Saturday, I stood before my closet for half an hour. My wardrobe held little beyond scrubs and jeans. Nurses rarely need evening wear. but buried in the back was a navy dress purchased for a friend's wedding 2 years earlier, simple, tailored, quietly declaring belonging without a word. I fastened my mother's pearl earrings, the sole keepsake I owned. Eleanor had given them to me on my 18th birthday. Lucy wore these the night she met your father, she'd said softly. I wrapped Eleanor's gift, a hand-bound photo album I'd spent weeks assembling, filled with snapshots of us baking together, printed for my phone. In the car, my hand stayed steady on the wheel. I knew Diane would orchestrate something. She always did at family events. A pointed remark, a deliberate seating choice, a subtle reminder of my position. But this was Eleanor's 80th birthday, possibly her last. I wasn't attending for Diane. I was there for the one person who had never required me to earn my place. The Magnolia Room stands at the corner of Main and Birch. White columns, magnolia trees framing the entrance, the only place in Crestwood that demands reservations. For Eleanor's milestone, Diane had reserved the entire main dining room, 30 guests, crystal stemware, crisp white linen, a jazz quartet murmuring in the corner. I arrived 10 minutes early, set my gift on the table near the door. Diane noticed me enter. Her gaze followed me across the room, but she said nothing, just lifted her wine glass and turned back to Uncle Harold. Eleanor presided at the head of the long table. She appeared frailer than the previous Sunday, thinner, her cardigan draping loosely over her shoulders. Yet when her eyes met mine, her face brightened. She extended both hands. "There you are." I bent to kiss her cheek, her fingers closed around mine with surprising strength. "Sit beside me," she whispered. I drew out the chair to her left. Only then did I notice the man to her right. Silver hair, charcoal suit, leather briefcase resting beneath his seat. A stranger. He offered a courteous nod, but remained silent. "Who's that?" I murmured. "A friend," Eleanor replied. "You'll meet him soon." Kyle swept in next, laughing too loudly at something on his phone. He spotted me, and the laugh died. "Oh, you actually showed up." Madison followed, already lifting her phone for a chandelier selfie. She positioned herself next to Eleanor, framing the shot with care, adjusting the angle 3 times to exclude me entirely. Dinner commenced. Plates appeared, conversation flowed. On the surface, everything appeared ordinary. In this family, ordinary was merely the prelude to trouble. Between appetizers and entrees, Diane rose and tapped her glass with a butter knife. The quartet fell silent. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," she began, voice smooth as honey, eyes sweeping the room. "Family means everything to the Everetts." She lingered on the word family. Her gaze locked on mine for one deliberate second. "I'd like to introduce our table. My wonderful son Kyle. You may know he just closed a major deal in Savannah." Kyle lifted his glass. "My beautiful daughter Madison. She's been so attentive to Grandma lately." Madison blew a kiss toward Eleanor. "And of course, my husband, Richard, the steady heart of this family." Richard gave a rigid nod. That concluded the introductions. 3 children, the complete roster per Diane. A woman across the table, someone I didn't know, perhaps from Richard's office, leaned forward and asked, "And who is this lovely young lady beside Eleanor?" Diane blinked once, then smiled. "Oh, that's Annabelle. She grew up around us." Around us, like a stray fed scraps on the porch. The woman nodded politely. The moment slipped away. Then Madison reached across me for the breadbasket. Her elbow knocked my wine glass. Deep red cascaded down the front of my navy dress. "Oops," she said, pressing her napkin to her mouth. "White might have been a wiser choice for you." Scattered chuckles. Kyle smirked behind his water glass. I glanced at the spreading stain, dark, blooming like a fresh bruise. I said nothing. I lifted my napkin, blotted twice, returned it to my lap. Under the table, Eleanor's hand found mine. She squeezed once. I squeezed back. The main course arrived: filet mignon, roasted asparagus, truffle mashed potatoes. The aroma alone exceeded my weekly grocery budget. That was when Diane struck again. "We need to adjust the seating slightly," she announced. "Uncle Harold requires more space for his chair. Annabelle, darling, the bar has some charming spots. You'd be far more comfortable there." It wasn't a request. Kyle leaned back. "Yeah, it's not like you're giving a toast or anything." A few heads at the table's far end exchanged looks. 1 or 2 offered automatic laughs, the kind people give to smooth awkwardness. No one protested. I glanced at Richard. He stared at his plate as though it held a solution. His fork remained motionless. I looked at Eleanor. Her jaw clenched, her knuckles whitened around her napkin, but she met my eyes and gave the tiniest nod, barely perceptible. "Wait," she said quietly, "not yet." I rose, smoothed the wine-stained dress, picked up my water glass. "Happy birthday, Grandma," I said, my voice held steady. I walked the 12 steps to the bar, counted each one, settled onto a stool, placed my glass down, and kept my spine straight. The young bartender, 22 perhaps, regarded me with quiet confusion and something like sympathy. "You okay?" he asked under the breath. "I'm fine," I answered. I wasn't, but 24 years had taught me how to appear that way. Have you ever sat surrounded by people yet felt utterly unseen, as though the air you draw doesn't register because no one bothers to notice you breathing? If you have, share it in the comments. I'd like to know I'm not alone. From the bar, I had an unobstructed view of the table. Diane laughed brightly, refilling glasses, touching arms, the perfect hostess. Kyle gestured through a story, punchline lost to distance. Madison glanced at her phone beneath the table. Eleanor remained at the head, untouched plate before her, observing every movement. The man in the gray suit remained motionless. His briefcase stayed tucked beneath the chair. He sliced his steak into meticulous squares and addressed no one. 20 minutes slipped by. Then Madison rose, phone in hand, and headed toward the restroom. She passed within arm's reach of me without so much as a glance, as though the bar stool stood vacant. She paused in the hallway, perhaps 6 feet away. She must have believed the jazz quartet would swallow her words. It didn't. "It's working," she murmured into the phone, voice hushed, yet carried clearly by the narrow corridor. "She's at the bar. Mom says one more nudge and she'll walk out for good." A pause while she listened. "No, Grandma suspects nothing. Mom's managing it. We just need her gone before Grandma's lawyer takes any steps." My fingers tightened around the glass. Lawyer. Before Grandma's lawyer takes any steps. Madison gave a soft laugh at whatever reply came, then returned to the dining room without acknowledging me. I sat perfectly still. This was no impulsive slight. This was not Diane in a foul mood or loosened by wine. This was deliberate, coordinated, rehearsed, timed to force me through the door before something irrevocable occurred. Something tied to Eleanor and a lawyer. I didn't yet know what, but the silver-haired stranger with the briefcase suddenly carried unmistakable meaning. Dessert arrived, a 3-tiered cake cloaked in white frosting, crowns with 80 candles. Everyone sang. From the bar, I mouthed the lyrics silently. Eleanor extinguished the flames in 2 careful breaths. Applause rose. Then she leaned toward Richard and whispered something inaudible. He stood, steadied her, and guided her slowly toward the restroom hallway until she halted at the bar. She reached for my hand. Her skin felt thin as tissue, every bone distinct beneath it, yet her grasp held iron. "Don't leave tonight," she breathed, barely audible. "No matter what unfolds, promise me." "I already promised, Grandma." "I know." She drew me fractionally closer. "Your parents left you far more than memories, Annabelle. It's time you understood." My stomach lurched. "What do you mean?" Richard materialized at her side. "Mom, the restroom is this way." Eleanor held my gaze one final second before releasing me. She shuffled onward with Richard, cane tapping steadily against the hardwood. I swiveled on the stool. The man in the gray suit was watching me. Not Diane, not Kyle, me. His face remained impassive, professional, the detached calm of someone accustomed to delivering difficult news. His briefcase rested under the chair, the brass clasp gleamed, and the corner of a thick manila envelope protruded from the top, unsealed. He noticed my stare, offered the slightest nod, then returned his attention to his coffee. My pulse hammered in my throat. "Your parents left you far more than memories." My parents had died when I was 5. They were 26 and 28, driving a 10-year-old Honda, living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment. What could they possibly have left behind? Whatever it was, Diane was determined I never learn of it. That single fact told me everything I needed to know. Eleanor resumed her place at the table. Diane refilled her wine glass, her 4th by my count. The evening ought to have begun winding down. Guests glanced at watches, reached for coats, but Diane was far from finished. She rose once more, glass aloft, cheeks bright with wine. "Just one more thing," she announced, sweeping her arm across the table. "Being a mother is the hardest role in the world, and sometimes you shoulder burdens that don't belong to you." Murmurs of agreement drifted from a few corners. "When Richard's brother passed, we took in his daughter." Diane pressed her palm to her chest. "No one else stepped forward. We sacrificed vacations, we sacrificed savings, we sacrificed our home, our lives, really." A woman near the table's end spoke. "That's Annabelle, isn't it? She seems like a lovely girl." Diane tilted her head. The wine loosened her tongue. "Lovely. She's been riding our coattails for 24 years. A short, harsh laugh escaped her. "Her parents left nothing, not a single cent. We raised her from scratch." The room stilled. Her parents left nothing. The words reached me clearly from 12 steps away, over the jazz, over the chime of glassware, over every other sound. My mother and father, dead at 26 and 28, resting in Crestwood Cemetery, Plot 14, and Diane stood before 30 people declaring they had abandoned me penniless. That was a lie. I didn't yet know its shape, but the silver-haired stranger with the briefcase suddenly carried unmistakable meaning. The waiter appeared at my side. "Excuse me, ma'am." Young, courteous, visibly uneasy. He placed a leather bill folder before me on the bar. I opened it. $3,270. 30 guests. Filets mignon, bottles of Pinot Noir, imported champagne, the 3-tiered cake. Every dollar charged to my name. "Mrs. Everett made the reservation under your name. She provided your card for the deposit." My card. The supplementary one Diane had added me to at 17. "For emergencies," she'd said. I hadn't touched it in years. I'd forgotten it existed. Diane had not. I looked toward the main table. Kyle grinned over the rim of his glass. Madison angled her phone toward me. Recording. Diane met my eyes and lifted her wine in a small, mocking toast. A challenge. 30 pairs of eyes watched. I opened my wallet, withdrew my own debit card, the one linked to the account I'd built through stocking shelves, drawing blood, pulling consecutive 12-hour shifts. I passed it to the waiter. "Thank you. You can run this." He hesitated. "Ma'am, are you certain?" "I'm certain." He took the card. I signed the receipt, added a 20% tip. From the head table, Diane's voice drifted over, light as smoke. "See, she knows her place." Laughter followed. Quieter, more restrained. A few guests averted their eyes. I capped the pen, set it down, began to rise. Then from the head of the table, clear and resonant as a bell in an empty chapel, "Just a moment, please." Eleanor's voice froze the room. Every head turned. She pushed back her chair. The man in the gray suit rose first, offering his arm. She accepted it, steadied herself, and drew up to her full 5 feet 2 inches. The jazz quartet had paused between numbers. The timing felt almost too perfect. The only sound was the soft clink of a fork being laid down. Eleanor surveyed the room the way she once regarded a classroom of fidgeting students, patient, unyielding, absolute. "Before anyone leaves, I have something to say. It is my birthday, after all." Diane's smile wavered. "Mom, it's been a long evening. You should rest." "Sit down, Diane." 3 words. No volume, no heat, only the quiet authority forged across 80 years of never issuing an empty command. Diane sat. Eleanor turned to me. "Annabelle, come back to the table, sweetheart." I hesitated. 24 years of training can root you in place even when rescue arrives. But she extended her hand, and something in her expression whispered now. I walked back. 12 steps, the same 12 I'd counted leaving. Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Madison lowered her phone. Eleanor waited until I stood beside her. Then she laid her hand on my arm and spoke loud enough for every guest to hear. "You belong here more than anyone at this table." The silence that followed felt denser than any I'd known, as though the air itself held its breath. The man in the gray suit reached under his chair, withdrew the briefcase, placed it on the table, released the clasps, and set a thick manila envelope beside Eleanor's untouched dessert plate. No one laughed now. Eleanor rested one hand on the envelope, the other gripped her cane. Diane just told this room Annabelle's parents left nothing. I would like to correct the record. She nodded to the man beside her. This is Thomas Garrett. He has been my attorney for 12 years. Thomas Garrett stepped forward, adjusted his glasses. His voice carried the calm precision of someone accustomed to reading figures under oath. In 2001, James and Lucy Everett established a trust fund for their daughter, Annabelle. The principal amount was $600,000, life insurance proceeds combined with savings. Richard and Diane Everett had been appointed custodial trustees. The room didn't erupt in gasps. This wasn't cinema. Yet I watched 30 faces subtly rearrange. First confusion, then silent arithmetic, then the slow, heavy dawn of comprehension. $600,000. My parents had left me $600,000. Eleanor's voice sliced through again, calm and unyielding. That money was intended for Annabelle's education, her first home, her future. She fixed her gaze directly on Diane. Every cent is gone. Diane's face lost all color. Not flushed now, but bone white, the pallor that precedes either denial or rage. That's not... She clutched the table's edge. Mom, this isn't the time or place. Eleanor never blinked. You chose this time and this place, Diane. You chose to humiliate my granddaughter before these 30 people. So I will correct the record before these same 30 people. Kyle surged to his feet. Grandma, you're confused. You don't understand. I have bank records, Kyle. Eleanor's tone stayed quiet, final. Sit down. Kyle sat. My hands had gone numb. Thomas Garrett opened the envelope and placed a neat stack of documents on the pristine white linen. These are notarized copies of bank statements from the trust account, he said, covering 18 years. He didn't recite every transaction. He didn't need to. His voice remained the same measured courtroom cadence. $80,000 withdrawn in 2008, corresponding to tuition payments for Kyle Everett at the University of Georgia. Kyle's jaw clenched. He stared at the page as though it might ignite. $45,000 in 2015, a BMW 3 Series registered to Madison Everett. Madison's phone slipped from her fingers and struck the table with a sharp crack. $120,000 between 2010 and 2018, home renovations at 14 Birch Lane, the Everett residence. The house where I had slept in the basement. $95,000 various vacation expenses, Myrtle Beach, Disney World, Lake Tahoe, destinations to which Annabelle was never invited. The balance had been drawn down incrementally across 20 years in personal expenditures by Diane M. Everett. 30 pairs of eyes fixed on those capers. I watched expressions shift from polite dinner party neutrality to something sharper, colder. A woman near the center set her napkin aside and eased her chair back an inch, as though the table itself had grown too close. Mrs. Patterson, Diane's closest friend, her church circle confidant, regarded Diane with an expression I had never witnessed aimed at her before. Doubt. Madison's voice cracked the hush. That money was for the whole family. It was for Annabelle, too. Eleanor pointed one slender finger at the stack. Her name, her fund, not yours. Richard hadn't stirred. His face matched the tablecloth in pallor, his palms pressed flat against the wood, bracing as if the floor might give way. Tears traced silent paths down my cheeks. I let them fall. Eleanor allowed the silence to linger 3 full seconds. Then she continued, I have lived 80 years watching who in this family truly deserves what. I have made my decision. Thomas Garrett adjusted his tie. Mrs. Eleanor Everett has formally amended her estate plan. Effective immediately, Annabelle Everett is named sole beneficiary. The room splintered. Kyle shoved his chair backward, rising again. "You can't do this." Madison dissolved into loud, wrenching sobs, mascara carving dark tracks. Diane's voice turned razor-sharp. "She isn't even your real granddaughter." Eleanor turned to Diane with the slow deliberation of someone facing a long-foreseen reckoning. "She is my son James's daughter. She is more Everett than you will ever be, Diane." Kyle jabbed a finger toward me. "This is manipulation. She's been working on Grandma for years." Eleanor's voice never lifted. "The only person who has manipulated anyone in this family is sitting right there." She leveled her cane at Diane. The tip quivered, but the aim was precise. Richard remained silent, hands flat, eyes fixed on the dying candles, resembling a man watching his home burn from within. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. "I didn't ask for any of this," I said. My voice held steady, just. "I only wanted to have dinner with my grandmother." Eleanor reached into her cardigan pocket and withdrew a worn, creased photograph. She held it aloft. A young man with dark hair, grinning broadly, cradling a toddler in a yellow dress. "Your father asked me to look after you," she said. "I am keeping my promise." I took the photo, my father's face beside my own. But the reckoning wasn't finished. Diane shoved her chair backwards so violently it struck the wall with a crack that startled the bartender. "This dinner is over." She snatched her purse, then whirled toward Eleanor. "You're clearly not of sound mind. We'll have this overturned by Monday." Thomas Garrett reached into his briefcase once more and produced a second document. He placed it deliberately on the table. "Mrs. Everett underwent a full cognitive evaluation 4 weeks ago by Dr. Fiona Reed, board-certified geriatric psychiatrist in Atlanta. The assessment confirms she is of sound mind. The report is notarized and filed." Diane's mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound emerged. She rounded on me, voice stripped raw, stripped of every pretense except pure venom. "You did this. You poisoned her against her own family." I met her gaze across the table, wine stains still darkening my dress, eyes still wet, hands still trembling, yet my words came out clear. "I've been sitting at the bar for 2 hours, Diane. When exactly did I manage that?" A ripple moved through the room. Not laughter, not a gasp, but something midway, a quiet collective release. Several guests looked away. One man rubbed the nape of his neck. Mrs. Patterson rose. She approached Diane, leaned in, and spoke in what she likely intended to be a whisper. It carried across the silence like a rifle shot. "Diane, is this true about the trust fund?" Diane gave no answer. She seized Richard's arm. "We're leaving now." Richard didn't budge. "Diane." For the first time that evening, something flickered behind his eyes, something long confined, now stirring. "No," he said, "not yet." Diane shifted tactics the way a Georgia Stoelm reverses without warning. The venom evaporated. Her shoulders sagged, her chin quivered, tears welled. When she spoke, her voice trembled like a frayed bread. "I gave up everything for that girl." She pressed a palm to her chest. 24 years, my youth, my energy, my savings, and this is how I'm repaid? Kyle wrapped an arm around Diane. "It's okay, Mom. We'll fight this." Diane turned to the remaining guests, eyes shining. She turned an old woman against her own family. "This is elder abuse. You're all witnesses." I felt the room tilt. A few guests shifted uneasily. An older man at the far end frowned toward me. Diane's tears had always been masterful. In Crestwood, she had perfected the part of the martyred mother, and the audience recognized the lines. It was taking hold. Then Thomas Garrett placed one final document on the table. He rotated it to face the room. "These are notarized bank records, withdrawal after withdrawal from the trust account over 18 years. Each withdrawal was signed by either Diane M. Everett or Richard J. Everett. Thomas fanned the pages deliberately. Dates, amounts, signatures, sheet after sheet after sheet. The room fell utterly still. Mrs. Patterson stared at the documents, then at Diane, then back at the documents. Diane felt the shift, the slow erosion of her audience. For the first time that evening, a crack appeared in her carefully rehearsed performance. Not sorrow, not fury, fear. She understood now. Eleanor had not acted on a whim. This was no impulsive outburst from a grieving grandmother. This was months, perhaps years of meticulous preparation, legal filings, medical assessments, notarized proof. Diane had stepped straight into the trap she herself had set. Richard rose. The motion was so quiet amid the surrounding turmoil that it took several seconds for heads to turn. He didn't shove his chair, he simply stood, slow, weighted, like a man surfacing from deep water. "Mom," his voice broke on that single word. "I'm sorry. I knew I should have stopped it years ago." Diane spun toward him. "Shut up. Don't say another word, Richard." "No, Diane." He faced her fully, and in that moment, I witnessed something absent for 24 years, Richard Everett meeting his wife's gaze without flinching. "Enough. I've stayed silent for 24 years. I'm finished." He turned to me. His chin trembled, his hands dangled uselessly at his sides. "Your parents trusted us, Annabelle. They trusted me." He swallowed hard. "I failed them. I failed you." The silence was absolute. I could hear ice shifting in someone's forgotten glass. I looked at this man, the one who had driven me to school when Diane refused, who had quietly repaired my bicycle chain in the garage, who had never once raised his voice at me, and who had also never raised it in my defense. "I know, Dad," I said. I hadn't called him that in years. It wasn't absolution, it was simply acknowledgement, the messy, knotted, imperfect truth of who he had been. Kyle stared at his father as though regarding a stranger. Madison's sobs quieted. Richard reached into his back pocket and withdrew a small, creased object, a handmade birthday card, construction paper, childish scrawl. "Annabelle wrote this for you 15 years ago, Mom," he said to Eleanor. "Diane threw it away. I kept it." Eleanor accepted the card with trembling fingers. She read it and wept. I stood, not abruptly, not theatrically, just rose, the way one stands after a decision that has taken 24 years to ripen. 30 faces watched, some softening with sympathy, some frozen in shock, some already mentally drafting the stories they would carry to church or the market tomorrow. I cared about none of those versions. I looked at Diane. "I'm not going to shout, I'm not going to call you names, but I am finished being the doormat you wipe your feet on. I am finished sitting at the bar while you decide who belongs in this family." Diane's lips parted, but no sound emerged. I turned to Kyle and Madison. "I don't hate either of you, but I won't keep pretending." Madison stared at the floor. Kyle stared at the wall. Neither met my eyes. I faced Eleanor and took her hand. "Thank you for keeping your promise to my dad," I said. She squeezed my fingers. Her eyes remained wet, yet a thin, fierce, deeply satisfied smile curved her lips. Then I addressed the room one final time. 30 people, crystal stemware, white linens now bearing the indelible marks of an evening no one would forget. "I paid the bill," I said. "That's the last thing I will ever pay for this family." I helped Eleanor to her feet. Thomas Garrett gathered his briefcase, secured the documents inside, and walked with us toward the exit. Behind us, Diane's voice clawed through the air. "You'll hear from our lawyer." Eleanor paused, turned just enough to look back over her shoulder with the calm patience of a woman who had anticipated this moment for 2 full years. "Please do," she replied. "Thomas is exceptionally thorough." We stepped into the March night. The air felt cold, sharp, and startlingly clean. The true battle was only beginning. I hid it in the garage behind the paint cans. I took the box. It weighed almost nothing. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Richard said. "I just didn't want you to lose them twice." He turned and walked to his truck without waiting for a reply. I stood in the parking lot, clutching a shoebox filled with pieces of my parents, and watched him drive away. That was the last time Richard and I ever spoke face to face. The fallout in Crestwood arrived swift and unforgiving, the way small towns handle scandals they cannot ignore. Diane's Facebook post, the one that reached 200 shares, was reread through clearer eyes. The comment section reversed course. Mrs. Patterson, the church group confidant who had questioned Diane about the trust fund at the Magnolia Room, telephoned the following Sunday. "I think you should find another group, Diane." Diane's Petals, the flower shop on Oak Street she had owned for 15 years, lost a third of its clientele within a month. In a town sustained by reputation, a court judgment functions as a scarlet letter. Kyle's real estate firm leased him. His supervisor avoided mentioning the case outright. If you can't manage your own family's finances, how can clients trust you with theirs? Madison, who had never held a position longer than 3 months, lost her sole support, Diane's. She applied at a grocery store on Route 12, the same Route 12 where I had stocked shelves at 16. Some circles close without anyone intending them to. Even after the ruling, Diane's narrative lingered in certain pockets of Crestwood. Some people cling to the first version they hear, no matter what evidence follows. To a handful of neighbors, I remained the gold digger, the adopted girl who had manipulated a frail, elderly woman in private group chats. Then Nora stepped in. Nora Beckett, my closest friend since 10th grade, now a reporter at the Crestwood Gazette, did not write a glowing tribute or a takedown. She wrote a precise, fact-driven article, court documents, bank statements, a clear timeline. No commentary, simply truth presented in order. It appeared on the front page of the Wednesday edition, in a town where the local papers still carried weight. The letters to the editor and online comments that followed told a story far removed from Diane's post. This time, people had documentation. What moved me most was not the public shift, it was the private one. Handwritten letters began arriving at my apartment, some from other adopted adults across the county. Their stories mirrored mine so closely they felt like echoes. The unequal roles, the absent photographs, the perpetual gratitude demanded for basic care. One woman wrote, "I was told my whole life I was lucky to be taken in. Your story showed me that lucky was their word, not mine." Among the stack came one I never anticipated, from a law office in Atlanta. "Gerald Hayward, my parents' attorney. I attempted to contact you when you turned 18 to explain the trust. My letters were returned. I believe they were intercepted. I regret I could not reach you sooner." Diane had blocked even that avenue. The Sunday after Nora's article appeared, I drove to Maple Hill. Eleanor sat on her porch in the rocking chair, moving in the slow, familiar cadence I had known since I was 5. 2 cups of tea waited on the side table. She always set out 2 before I arrived. Always. I sat beside her without speaking for a long while. The dogwood trees in her yard were in full bloom, white and pink petals, delicate in appearance, yet sturdy enough to endure a Georgia spring. "How long did you know?" I finally asked. Eleanor cradled her cup in both hands. 2 years. I found a bank statement in Richard's desk while searching for a pen. Annabelle Everett Trust was printed across the top. Balance, $43. She sipped, set the cup down. "I spent 6 months verifying everything, contacted Gerald Hayward, spoke with the bank, then found Thomas. I waited for the right moment. Diane chose the restaurant. I simply used her stage." I gazed at the dogwoods. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because if I had told you too early, Diane would have found a way to spin it. She's skilled at that. I needed everything documented. I needed it unassailable." She reached beneath her chair and drew out a small album I had never seen. Inside were photographs. Eleanor at the cemetery, standing before 2 tombstones, placing white roses. The dates spanned years. "I go every April," she said. "Your father's birthday." I hadn't known. 15 years of visits. White roses every single time. I cried, not the stunned, wounded tears from the restaurant, these were quieter, deeper, the kind that come when someone proves love carries no expiration date. Your father would be proud, Eleanor said, not because of the money, because you stayed kind. 6 months later, I stood in the Crestwood Public Library, the same library where Eleanor had taken me to story hour at 7, and watched her cut a ribbon. The banner behind her read, "The James and Lucy Everett Scholarship Fund." It was a Tuesday morning. 40 people attended: teachers, hospital nurses, families from the county foster system. Thomas Garrett stood at the back, arms folded, the faintest trace of a smile on his face. I had used the restitution, the original $600,000, to endow the fund. Thomas structured it as a nonprofit. The mission was straightforward: educational support for foster and adopted kids in Mercer County. Tuition, books, housing, whatever they needed to build independent lives without needing anyone's permission. Eleanor asked me to speak. I'm a nurse, not an orator, but I tried. I said, my parents created a trust fund when they were 25. They were planning for a daughter they wouldn't live to raise. I'm using that money the way I believe they would have wanted, to help kids like me. I looked across the small crowd. Some nodded. A woman in the second row wept quietly. Being adopted doesn't make you less. Being different doesn't make you a burden. And if anyone ever tells you you only matter because someone chose to keep you, remember, you mattered before they chose. You mattered the day you were born. Eleanor clapped first, then everyone joined. We served cake afterwards, Eleanor's recipe, apple crumble, cinnamon so rich you could smell it from the parking lot. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is noisy, bitter, and hollows you out. This was legacy. 6 months later, I stood in the Crestwood Public Library, the same library where Eleanor had taken me to story hour at 7, and watched her cut a ribbon. The banner behind her read, "The James and Lucy Everett Scholarship Fund." It was a Tuesday morning. 40 people attended: teachers, hospital nurses, families from the county foster system. Thomas Garrett stood at the back, arms folded, the faintest trace of a smile on his face. I had used the restitution, the original $600,000, to endow the fund. Thomas structured it as a nonprofit. The mission was straightforward: educational support for foster and adopted kids in Mercer County. Tuition, books, housing, whatever they needed to build independent lives without needing anyone's permission. Eleanor asked me to speak. I'm a nurse, not an orator, but I tried. I said, my parents created a trust fund when they were 25. They were planning for a daughter they wouldn't live to raise. I'm using that money the way I believe they would have wanted, to help kids like me. I looked across the small crowd. Some nodded. A woman in the second row wept quietly. Being adopted doesn't make you less. Being different doesn't make you a burden. And if anyone ever tells you you only matter because someone chose to keep you, remember, you mattered before they chose. You mattered the day you were born. Eleanor clapped first, then everyone joined. We served cake afterwards, Eleanor's recipe, apple crumble, cinnamon so rich you could smell it from the parking lot. It wasn't revenge. Revenge is noisy, bitter, and hollows you out. This was legacy. 6 months later, I stood in the Crestwood Public Library, the same library where Eleanor had taken me to story hour at 7, and watched her cut a ribbon. The banner behind her read, "The James and Lucy Everett Scholarship Fund." It was a Tuesday morning. 40 people attended: teachers, hospital nurses, families from the county foster system. Thomas Garrett stood at the back, arms folded, the faintest trace of a smile on his face. I had used the restitution, the original $600,000, to endow the fund. Thomas structured it as a nonprofit. The mission was straightforward: educational support for foster and adopted kids in Mercer County. Tuition, books, housing, whatever they needed to build independent lives without needing anyone's permission. Eleanor asked me to speak. I'm a nurse, not an orator, but I tried. I said, My parents created a trust fund when they were 25. They were planning for a daughter they wouldn't live to raise. I'm using that money the way I believe they would have wanted, to help kids like me. I looked across the small crowd. Some nodded. A woman in the second row wept quietly. Being adopted doesn't make you less. Being different doesn't make you a burden. And if anyone ever tells you you only matter because someone chose to keep you, remember, you mattered before they chose. You mattered the day you were born. Eleanor clapped first, then everyone joined. We served cake afterwards,